Those who seem to defy gravity and disobey the laws of physics have to be a rather special group of people. Astronauts in space, acrobats in a circus, but last but not least, rally drivers belong to this unusual group. They can do things which are absolutely unbelievable for us normal mortals. One of these extraordinary people is Walter Röhrl, rally legend and without a doubt one of the best and most successful rally drivers of all time. A genius on four wheels and maybe even the best driver ever. That's the kind of worthy praise he still gets today from rally fans, former rivals and experts. People who really know what they're talking about. For the rally sports fans, Röhrl is still and will always be one of the heroes of their rallying dreams. Naturally, he stayed true to the car scene to this day. As a representative for Porsche, he tests and develops the newest models and is a well-respected representative of the sports car company in Zuffenhausen. How did his career in rally sport begin? How did he achieve his great victories? Why did he never want to try Formula One? The highs and lows of his unique career. Walter Röhrl tells it all in Motorheads.
Ich war, glaube 7 Jahre alt.
I think I was about 7 years old and my father was buying granite from somewhere deep in the Bavarian forest for his stonemason business. He took me along and there we were with a mill owner who also owned a quarry. His car was parked on the mill and the quarry was about 600 meters away. At that time the devil got the better of me and I said, "Now I'll drive the car to death." So I got into the car at the mill, but I saw that my father and the mill owner had gone to the quarry. It was a Fiat 1400, which were around at that time. It must have been 1954. And I started the car and drove the 600 meters up to the quarry. My father was, of course, shocked to see his car coming towards him on its own. He couldn't see that someone was sitting in it because I was so small. I was looking out from under the steering wheel. I stopped there.
Hat einen Schock gekriegt, wie dieses Auto kommt, alleine. Hat niemand gesehen, dass jemand im Auto sitzt, weil ich eben so klein war, dass ich unter dem Lenkrad durchgeschaut habe. Und bin dann
I parked the car and went over to my dad, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. Apparently, it was only because I had seen how it works with a clutch, and from this moment on, I was a car driver. In the eyes of my father, I had passed the test and I was allowed to drive without restrictions. Here in the yard, from here up to the petrol station. It was always my job to fill up the car. I was allowed to do that. In winter, stonecutters have nothing to do, so my father was always out curling. And in these woods, where the pond is, I just drove around all day. On the snowy roads through the forest until my father wanted to come home. And so I already had a close relationship to the car, but I still didn't have any wish to be a racing driver. Funnily enough, that came later, through skiing with a friend of mine. I had a brother who was 10 years older and he was really into cars. He had driven a Fiat, probably our father's, and then switched to a Porsche. I was 10 years old at the same time that my brother was 20, and of course, he always had to take me with him. So my parents could get rid of me for a while, and that's how I made the connection to Porsche cars.
Und ist dann zu Porsche gewechselt. Und ich war damals 10 Jahre alt, als der Bruder 20 war. Und da hat mich natürlich immer mitnehmen
My brother always said, "Remember one thing, forget about mopeds. Save up until you can afford a sensible car, and a sensible car is a Porsche." And that was a sentence that pretty much stuck in my head.
Du kannst da alles sparen. Spar so lange, bis du ein gescheites Auto kaufen kannst. Ein gescheites Auto ist ein Porsche.
At 21, I had enough money to buy a second-hand Porsche 356. That was one of the first cars that I drove.
Habe ich dann so viel Geld gehabt, dass ich mir einen gebrauchten 356er Porsche kaufen konnte. Das war dann mein erstes Auto, das ich gefahren habe. Ich war im bischöflichen Ordinariat in
I was at the bishop's residence in Regensburg, where the central land administration of the 7th Diocese of Bavaria was based. I was there for a few years, working as an administrative employee when I was 18 and had a driving license. I was then transferred to field service. The leader of this department was a lawyer, but he had no driving license. We had a Mercedes as our company car and we drove all over Bavaria. Our district was from Aschaffenburg to Berchtesgaden, from Coburg to the Bodensee. And that was also definitely an important point. I drove a lot, 120 to 130,000 kilometers per year. With this Mercedes, and Dr. Senglein, the lawyer, was the passenger. As a non-driver, he had no idea what was fast and what was slow, so I always drove as fast as I could. That was still possible with the traffic back then. I can remember. I drove as fast from Regensburg to Würzburg then as I do now on the Autobahn. There was no Autobahn then, and the oncoming cars noticed that a car was coming their way unusually fast, and they often blinked and flashed their lights. He asked me, "Hey, why are they flashing like that?" And I said, "Doctor, those are all friends. I'm just waving to them." And then I was transferred back to the interior duty, and he said to the girls working there, "Girls, I tell you one thing, that Walter, he knows every other person in Bavaria."
Der Walter, der kennt jeden Zweiten in Bayern. Meine erste Rallye war zum Beispiel ein Lauf zur Deutschen Meisterschaft.
My first rally was, for example, a race of the German Championship, where I had contact to rally sport for the first time in my life. Normally it starts with orienteering races, small rallies, regional rallies, and then at some point it's every race driver's dream to take part in the German Championship. Of course, I just jumped right into the deep end and started with the German Championship race. Rally Bavaria it was called then. It was the largest event, with an 850 Fiat. That was my first appearance in a rally. We dropped out after 450 kilometers because the clamp on the alternator broke off. At some point in that race there was a special test in Altmühltal, gravel downhill, and we were 6th or 8th fastest of these 300 cars with my 47 horsepower. My discoverer and co-pilot immediately turned this into something. He wrote a letter to the car magazines in Germany. "My friend is the best driver in the world. You have to get him a car." And this went on for 3 years. We drove 5 rallies, privately funded. Always in cars that Herbert got for us. And after every rally he wrote to the papers, "My friend is the best driver in the world." And after 5 rallies they said, "Okay, let's give the fools from the Bavarian forest a car. There seems to be something in this. He always drives really fast." And then I was a pro.
Und dann war ich Profi. Ich habe 71 diesen Vertrag bei Ford unterschrieben, einen 2-Jahres-Vertrag.
I signed a contract with Ford in 1971, a 2-year contract. And in the end of 71 I said, I'm going to stop. I had so many problems at home because of my brother who died in an accident. Every time I went to a rally, there was a scene at home, like they would never see me again. That put me under such stress that at the end of the year I said, okay, I can't do this anymore. This nightmare every time. From November of 71 until about May of 72, my period of no rally driving, I realized that I didn't want to live without rallying. I was a very unhappy person. As I said, if I couldn't rally drive anymore, then my life was ruined. I called Ford back. Mr. Kranenfuß was the boss at that time. I said, "You'll say I'm crazy, but I want to drive again." His enthusiasm was immediate and he said, "Great, then we'll have to make sure that we can drive in one of the 2 rallies before the famous Olympia Rally." And from that point on I had a spark. Maybe I wanted to prove that I was the best. Because then I drove faster at the Olympia Rally than Mikola. And those were names that I didn't even want to say out loud. That's the first time that I hoped that I really had something that could get me into this class. We had a start number 26 and we drove off. Within the first 2 or 3 tests I had the best time. Until then there was a list put up. Best time, Hannu Mikkola, second fastest, Chopin Mikkola, Danish, Tony Fowle, Rauno Aaltonen.
Zweitschnellster Chopin Mikkola, Danish, Tony Fowle, Rauno Aaltonen. Und dann kam Start Nummer 26.
And then came start number 26, best time. And then the secretary, who took care of this rally, Herbert Volker, who was a famous journalist then, said, "That's a timing mistake," and crossed off the name. In the second test, the same again. Now it's this start number 26 again. What's with your computers? Something isn't right, that the best time is always car 26. And it was not until the third test, where I was second or third fastest, that they began to think that maybe something just wasn't right. Who is that in the Capri? In any case, at some point they realized that it really was so, that I was that fast, and that was definitely the point at which I became known in the world press. And that was because the Olympia was the best event that existed in Germany.
Bekannt wurde, weil die Olympia Rally war ja die beste Veranstaltung, die es jemals in Deutschland gegeben hat. Sicher ist das Auto immer das Dominierende.
Certainly the car is the dominant factor when you compete in a sport that is dependent on such a machine. But the driver was more able to show how good he was than on a circuit course. I could drive a 6-kilometer gravel road downhill test in a Fiat with 47 horsepower and suddenly get the 6th fastest time. With the 850 Fiat, they would have lapped me 5 times in a proper circuit course. And that was so quirky that I said, okay, I think I can show how much better I am here than on a circuit course. That was the general idea which led me in the direction I went. Then I later went on the drive circuit courses as well. That's just a perfect twist of fate. When I drive a circuit course, I can probably still learn something. I can get even more perfect, and that's why I later went onto the drive circuits. When I drove my first race in a Schnitzer BMW on the Norris Ring, that was the first time I sat in a race car. I drove around, and of course it was fun to drive with all those race car drivers, but it was also clear that the driving feeling, the fun, was just not equal to the rally racing.
Ich war überrascht, wie viel Auto ein Formel-1-Auto ist.
I was surprised by how much of a car a Formula One car really is. As the driver of a road car with a body without freestanding wheels, you don't see this cigarette box with 4 wheels as a car. But I was really impressed that it really drives like a car, but more exact, lighter, and it's really fun. There's no doubt. I think it was the 1980 comparison test against Fittipaldi. Me in his Formula One car and he in my Fiat 131. We had switched cars, and I was really impressed how the car drove. In any case, after I had waited 2 days just to get into the car, I knew it was out of the question that I would drive a Formula One. Those pictures were incredible. Pictures of me, my head poking out over the roll cage. It was just pitiful how I looked.
Weil es waren Bilder, die waren göttlich, als der Kopf über den Überbügel rausgeschaut hat, also jämmerlich, wie das ausgeschaut hat. Beginne ich mit dem Capri, das war natürlich mein erstes.
Let's start with the Capri. That was, of course, my first factory car with a 2-year contract. A fee of 500 Deutschmarks for 2 years. And then suddenly it cost nothing. They give you a car. Everything is paid for. That was just sensational for me. That was a dream after I had driven 5 rallies in 3 years and my co-pilot had paid for everything himself. Then suddenly it costs nothing. It was great, even if that car was anything but a real rally car. A Capri?
Richtiges Rallye-Auto war. Also Capri, das war immer so ein Boulevardrenner. Damals waren die Werksautos Escorts.
Those were cheap cars. The factory cars were Escorts. But they were built in England. And Ford Germany had to call it Capri for trademark purposes. But it wasn't long before we realized we could also drive fast in a Capri.
Daneben steht der Ascona. Das Opel Euro Händler-Team.
Next to it is the Ascona, the Opel Euro dealer team. They'll remember that my first victory in a World Championship rally, the Rally Acropolis, considered to be the toughest rally in Europe.
Das ist die schwerste Rallye gegolten hier in Europa und das war also ganz toll, dass ich damals mit diesem Ascona gewonnen habe.
And it was great that I won it in an Ascona. There were also 3 Stratuses at the start. I have to say, it's a great memory. I remember that car fondly, and the Acropolis was a rally that we can only dream of today.
Da bist du gefahren 40 Stunden non-stop bei Staub.
You drive 40 hours non-stop, in dust, heat, the sparks fly, and roads you can't even push a donkey cart through. You race through it, and that's how it was.
6 ins Ziel. Also das waren noch andere Zeiten wie heute.
Out of 100 starters, 6 finished. Those were different times. And then next to that, here's the Fiat 131. One thing that springs to mind, the first victory in a World Championship, the first win in Monte Carlo. The Monte Carlo victory was always a dream I had in mind. That there was suddenly a World Championship for drivers was secondary. But that didn't even exist earlier. Before that, there was only a European driving champion with the highest title.
Daneben steht der Opel Ascona 400.
Next to that is the Opel Ascona 400. I remember the race in Monte Carlo, because winning there with my Opel was unimaginable then. Those were out-and-out sports cars. They were built only for sport, and no one thought it possible that I could win with an Ascona.
Noch dazu, wo damals eben schon 82 die
And on top of that, the four-wheel drive Audis were competing, and Monte Carlo has loads of snow and ice. Everyone thought it wasn't possible to win without a four-wheel drive. In 1982, Monte Carlo was always the first race of the championship, and no one would have predicted that we could finally beat the Audis. That was the new era of these four-wheel drive cars.
Das war eine neue Ära, diese Vierradautos. Und dann habe ich Monte Carlo gewonnen.
And then I won in Monte Carlo. There was a huge sensation, and over the years it became a duel with Mikel Motto. That was very much in the media and often quoted and discussed. But regarding the reliability of the car, I never had a problem for the whole year.
Aber über die Zuverlässigkeit vom Auto, dass ich nie Probleme hatte, über das ganze Jahr konnten wir die
And then finally in Africa, at the last rally in the Ivory Coast, they lost their bottle and blew it. They tipped the car over, and that was the ground then. That's where we won the World Championship with the Ascona.
am Kopf gestellt. Und das war dann der Grund, dass wir mit dem Ascona Weltmeister wurden. Das war 82.
That was 82, but in the same year the Lancia, the successor to the Lancia Stratus, the Rally 037 the little car was called, developed with a mid-engine and a chassis like a Formula One. And there was also a challenge for me. That was fascinating. I thought that could be really good, especially for my driving style.
Das hat mich fasziniert. Sage ich, okay, das könnte speziell für meinen Fahrstil ganz gut sein, dieses Auto, das Formel 1.
A car that drives similar to a Formula One racer. So I decided to sign on with Lancia in 83. And that was the finest rally year of my whole life. I was allowed to choose how many rallies I wanted to drive.
Wie viel Rallye ich fahren wollte. Ich war also jetzt 80 Weltmeister, 82 und hatte irgendwo...
I was world champion in 80 and 82, and somewhere along the line I was fed up. I said, no, I don't want all this media hullabaloo. I'm only going to drive 5 of the nicest rallies in the world. Have a little fun. And that's what I did. I won Monte Carlo again with that car, and it stuck. That's the car that fits my driving style the best. You could drive like a Formula One racer with really minimum steering movement. Very clean. That was a great car.
Geringsten Lenkeinschlägen und ganz sauber. Also es war ein tolles Auto. Ja, das ist am Anfang ist man ein bisschen skeptisch, ob diese...
At first I was a bit skeptical about the whole water pipes thing. The hollow pipes that the whole tubular latticed frame consists of. That they would hold up, but they did. We had hardly any problems with that. The car had relatively good traction because of the mid-engine. Of course, there was still the problem against the four-wheel drive cars from Audi. But it was an advantage that the Audi drivers at that time made too many mistakes. They drove themselves into a cul-de-sac, time and time again. The bigger the problem, the more mistakes they made. And so we were able to see them off. Although finally, at the end of that year, the World Championships were at an end. I was in the lead after these 5 rallies, and so I said, no, I won't drive any more rallies. So Hummel became the world champion.
Und habe gesagt, nein, ich fahre keine Rallye mehr, und aufgrund dessen ist der Hanno dann Weltmeister geworden. Ich hatte ja 3 Jahre schon von 80 weg ein bisschen einen Krieg mit Audi.
For about 3 years after 1980, I had a little war with Audi. But then in 84, somewhere inside myself, I was ready for the first time. I didn't want to stop my driving career before I had driven a four-wheel drive. That was the beginning of a whole new era.
Das war ja damals eine ganz neue Ära. Und es war...
And it was at the time of Stig Blomqvist, the only driver whom I hadn't driven against with the same car. I always had this yardstick to compare whether I was better than the others or not. I made it dependent upon whether I was sitting in the same car as him. And Stig, he was the only one I hadn't competed against yet. That was motivation enough for me to say, okay, now I'm ready to go to the Bavarian company. Our feuding had already calmed down a bit. In the meantime, a few people I liked had already gone to Audi, and they convinced me to do it. You're a Bavarian, you should do something for a Bavarian car company.
Und die haben mich dann überredet, einfach das zu tun. Die haben gesagt, du bist der Bayer, dann musst du auch was für eine bayerische Automobilfirma tun.
And so this contract came to be in 1984. Once again, the greatest challenge there was the Monte Carlo.
War einfach Rallye Monte Carlo, eine Rallye mit wahnsinnig viel Schnee damals.
A rally with insane amounts of snow at that time, in '84. And with Stick there, who was considered the absolute king of snow and 4x4s. And that's why that was my last and my fourth victory of Monte Carlo. That was also a sort of climax. I really enjoyed it. I was also really pleased with myself that it went so well. There was also an impetus for me.
Und es war für mich einfach der Druck, dass ich 6 Wochen Zeit hatte, Vierrad.
I only had 6 weeks' time to learn how to drive four-wheel drive cars, which was very hard for me. I really bumbled around like an idiot. I really did a lot of damage during those weeks. I completely totaled one car. 2, I deformed terribly. Until finally, just in time for the race, I learned the secret to driving four-wheel drive cars.
Gerade rechtzeitig zum Start von der Monte dann hinter das Geheimnis des Vierradfahrens gekommen bin. Es war ja erforderlich bei dem Auto durch das System des Vierrads, das natürlich sehr nah.
It was necessary with that car because of the four-wheel drive system, which is very similar to Jeep's.
Bremsen mit dem linken Fuß.
Braking with the left foot and stomping on the brakes in between. It was necessary to make the car drivable around all types of curves. That was all part of the program. And that's what was so hard for me during those 6 weeks. I just didn't want to admit this. I said, I've driven cars for 20 years and I have never braked with my left foot. Why should I suddenly do it now? But it was necessary. And then it only took a short amount of time until I had the sensitivity in the left foot. For 20 years I had only pushed the clutch down to the metal. But it was a terrible challenge for me, which I finally perfected in a short period of time.
Die ich dann letztendlich in kurzer Zeit, glaube ich, ziemlich perfekt gelernt habe. Das hat sich am meisten Spaß gemacht. Einfach, wenn du diese Kraft.
That was really the most fun. When you have the power, when you always have this power, you can make a mistake with the gas pedal. For me, that was the biggest challenge, the most fun. If you just drive pedal to the metal, the thing stays stable. That was a waste of my talent, and that's why I really enjoyed that the most.
Vergeudete Zeit meines Talentes. Und darum habe ich das am meisten natürlich genossen. So ein Auto, das also zu jedem
A
Zeitpunkt.
car that was able to just go off the road if you didn't use the right weight on the accelerator, even if it was non-elegant driving.
Darstellung gefunden hast. Obwohl das kein elegantes Auto
As far as driving is concerned, these cars certainly looked more elegant before and probably needed a bit more sensitivity. It was a bit like driving with a crowbar, but it was really great. It's like skiing.
ein bisschen mehr Gefühl mitbringen. Das war also ein bisschen das Autofahren mit der Brechstange. Aber
Having deep snow and having an icy mogul slope. The deep snow is nice, but it's soft. Loads of people can do that. But skiing down an icy slope is really something special, and so I'd compare it with that.
das ist schon wie eine heiße Sache. Und so möchte ich das auch vergleichen. In diesem Auto konnte ich
In this car, I could show my strongest skills. At least, that was my opinion. It was very dangerous.
der Meinung war, war sehr gefährlich, aber es hat auch am meisten Spaß gemacht letztendlich.
But in the end, it was the most fun. Like so many things in life, it seems obvious, but in the end, with the accidents that happened, the cut was too extreme for the subsequent Group A. But there you saw not only the dangers of motorsport, because of fast cars.
Aber man hat dann nicht nur die Gefahr des Motorsports gesehen jetzt durch die schnellen Autos, sondern
But
auch
also a little of the dangers for those in charge, that rally sport would overtake Formula One.
den Rang abläuft. Und da hat man das dann ganz geschickt benutzt, um einmal
But on the other hand, it also wouldn't be very sensible if I built a ski jump that maybe 3 skiers were able to jump from, and all the others crash. That wouldn't be quite right. It was like that.
wo vielleicht noch 3 in der Lage sind, hinunterzuspringen und alle anderen stürzen, dann stimmt da was nicht mehr.
I wouldn't even get 3 drivers who could drive that car that fast back then. That's how crazy it was.
So verrückt war das. Man muss das wirklich mit einer Rakete
You
vergleichen.
really have to compare it to a rocket. You have to fight to change the direction, and when you've put all your energy into it, then you had to struggle again to change direction again. It was incredible.
Unglaublich, aber natürlich, wenn man es einigermaßen beherrscht hat, natürlich.
But of course, once you had more or less mastered it, it was a fantastic feeling. The power that was released, a monster you had to control, the 550 horsepower, you can't forget that.
Vergessen, dass ich im Prinzip mit diesem
Basically, I drove past the same trees and the same cliffs again and again with that same car. That's something that many people forget. In circuit racing, they changed the courses and the cars, but not with rally racing. And that was what was so exciting about the whole thing.
Und das war das Reizvolle an der ganzen Angelegenheit.